Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to bring you a case which features around the same time of the year, around the Christmas season. I hope any cases I bring you this month do have that link. This is one of the worst Christmas cases I personally have ever read about. Today I bring you the case of Ronald Gene Simmons, who went on to commit mass murder of none other than his own family. So let's go back to the beginning. Ronald Gene Simmons was born on July 15th, 1940 to his parents William and Loretta Simmons. Unfortunately, at the age of 3, Ronald's father would die of a stroke, but less than a year later his mother Loretta would go on to remarry another gentleman named William D. Griffin. Now William, Ronald's stepfather, was a civil engineer in the US Army Engineering Corps, and they did have to move around quite a lot. In 1946 they moved to Little Rock in Arkansas, and they proceeded for the next 10 years or so to move across Arkansas at many different times, but eventually settling in Arkansas when William retired. On September 15th, 1957, when Ronald was 17, he would drop out of school to join the US Navy. He was stationed in Washington, where he would actually go on to meet his future wife, Becky Olubari, and they would go on 3 years later on July 9th, 1960 to be married. Over 18 years that they spent together, they would have 7 children. Ronald then decided to leave the Navy. He was out for 2 years and then he re-enlisted in the US Army. And on the 30th of November 1979, Ronald would retire with 20 years service, a distinguished career behind him and a collection of honours and medals, so he did have a very good career within the Army. But not all was well at home for Ronald. There were allegations made that he was sexually assaulting his 17-year-old daughter, Sheila. She would actually become pregnant with his child, and it was found that he had been sexually abusing her for 2 years prior to this. Now, in fear of actual prosecution and arrest, he actually flees with the entire family. In 1981, they would move to Ward in Arkansas, and then 2 years later, in 1983, they would move to Dover, again in Arkansas. The family lived on a plot of land by the name of Mockingbird Hill. They actually lived in 2 makeshift trailers that were joined together to make one large one. They didn't live in the best of conditions in the trailers. They were said to have no indoor plumbing and there was no telephone. But as I said, all was not well, and in 1987 Becky decided that she wanted to leave her husband and take her children and their grandchildren and get as far away from Ronald as she possibly could. Unfortunately for Becky, Ronald would discover her intentions, and what went on to happen would become one of the most disturbing and horrid cases to ever happen over a festive season. This would actually go on to become America's largest family mass murder. So on December 22nd, 3 days before Christmas in 1987, Ronald would shoot his 46-year-old wife Becky and their eldest son, 29-year-old Gene, in the head. He would also go on to strangle their 3-year-old granddaughter Barbara to death. He then took the bodies and dumped them in a cesspit that he'd had his children dig several weeks before. So the complete and utter disrespect of this man, his wife, his son and his little granddaughter, buried in a cesspit. Next, he moved on to a further 4 family members who he actually told that he had Christmas gifts for them, and he wanted them to come out back one at a time and receive their gifts from him. First was his 17-year-old daughter Loretta, who he drowned in a rain barrel. Next would follow 14-year-old Eddie, killed in the same way, 11-year-old Marianne, also in the same way, and finally 8-year-old Becky. So these children had been in the house thinking that their father was going to give them a present. They went out excited, one at a time, out the back of the house, only for one at a time, one after the other, to be murdered. So on that day of the 22nd of December, Ronald actually murdered 7 members of his own family. He murdered his wife, he murdered a grandchild, and he murdered 5 of his own children. Ronald, following this, just continues like absolutely nothing has happened, and 4 days later, more family members arrive at the household. First to enter the home was Ronald's son Billy, who's 22, and his 21-year-old wife Renata. They were both shot immediately upon entering the house. And their 20-month-old son, Ronald's grandson, was strangled and then drowned. So he's up to 10 family members at this stage. Next, 24-year-old Sheila, his daughter, the one that he actually impregnated, and her husband Dennis arrive at the house, and again promptly are both shot and murdered. They had 2 children with them, the first of which being Sylvia, who was actually Ronald's biological daughter. She was 6 and he would strangle her also, along with his 21-month-old grandson, Michael. He proceeded to lay all the bodies neatly on the floor of the lounge of the trailer and cover them all in coats, with the exception of Sheila, the daughter whom he abused, whom he covered with one of his wife Becky's best tablecloths. So I don't know if he felt he was giving her some form of special treatment, but he lined the bodies up and went on with his day. He had a drink, he went to the pub, he sat and had a beer at home and looked at the Christmas lights, and really pretty much just got on with things like nothing had happened at all. 2 days pass, it's December 28th, and Ronald leaves his home and heads to the local law office in Russellville and proceeds to murder 24-year-old Kathy Kendrick, the secretary within the business. He had been quite infatuated with Kathy and he had made sexual advances towards her, and she had rejected him, and for this great crime of rejection, he murdered her also. Ronald is now up to 15 people that he has murdered, 14 family members and now this lady who spurned his advances. Next he heads to an oil office and shoots 33-year-old J.D. Chaffin, who it is said that he had no connection with whatsoever, so I'm not entirely sure why he was targeted, but he was shot and killed also. He also shot and wounded the owner, Rusty Taylor. Thankfully he survived, he didn't die, but not through want of Ronald trying. Simmons then heads to a convenience store that he used to work at and proceeds to shoot another 2 people, employees there. Fortunately they both survived, they were wounded but they didn't die. But Ronald is not finished. Finally he heads to Woodlawn Motor Freight Company, which is one of the companies that he was actually dismissed from for sexual misconduct, and he walks in and shoots another lady there. Thankfully again she doesn't die, but she is severely wounded. He then sits and waits with the receptionist and calmly chats while waiting to be arrested. He waits for the police to arrive. When they do arrive he offers no resistance, he's arrested and taken to prison. Ronald would go on, it's no surprise, to be convicted of 16 counts of murder, and he was convicted to 16 death sentences. He very much wanted the death penalty. He did not want to be given life in prison. He refused appeals that were offered to him. When you get sent to death row, you are automatically given an appeal. He said he didn't want this. I'll actually quote what he said. He said, "To those who oppose the death penalty in my particular case, anything short of death would be cruel and unusual punishment." This man's talking about cruel and unusual punishment. Personally, I don't think he deserves to breathe on this planet. But on the other hand, if that's what he wants, I don't know, you just want to give him not what he wants, don't you? Ronald never offered any explanation for why he did what he did. He never expressed any remorse whatsoever, and he seemed to positively look forward to his death penalty being carried out. He repeatedly denied all and any appeals that were suggested to him, and he had to be kept during his time at the prison in solitary confinement. Such was the other prisoners on death row's hatred for him, both for what he had done. Obviously he had murdered a lot of children and women, and that doesn't tend to go down too well, even on death row. But on top of that, the other prisoners felt like he was making a mockery of the whole situation, of the appeals process, and they felt that his actions would actually somehow impact and get in the way of any potential appeals that they themselves may need to have. I do apologise for the light that was shining in there. I'm not entirely sure how long that's been the case, but I'm sure it was very irritating. So on May 31st, 1990, Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton, yes, that one, signed Ronald's death warrant. And on June 25th, that death warrant was carried out. He received the death penalty by form of lethal injection. None of the surviving members of his family wanted to claim the body, so he went on to be buried in a potter's field. And that is, very briefly, the story of Ronald Gene Simmons. Quite possibly one of the most evil men out there, to not only murder his wife and children, but to have the capability of strangling and murdering little babies. This man there's just something inherently evil. The world's a better place now that he's not in it, but coming up to Christmas and over the Christmas period, it must have been absolutely devastating for that community and for any remaining family members. That's the case for today. Thank you for watching. I do hope to cover some more before Christmas. If there is anything you would specifically like me to cover in the new year, pop it down in the comments. I'll very gladly look at that for you. And thank you again for watching. Over and out from Lisa Loves.